Good evening, everyone. So I don't know whether this is loud for you guys or just loud for the purposes of recording.
No, it's for the live stream.
Okay, so I need to still project my voice for us in the room, right? Okay. So if I could kindly ask us to just move forward so that it's more conversational as opposed to a direct, yeah, I'd appreciate that. So if we could just come, start moving so that we kick it off. Excellent. So thank you so much. We apologize for the delay. We were trying to give, Kenyans some time to come in. Thanks to everyone who came in early and was here on time. Heads up to you, man. And so I think I'll allow us maybe in the room to just quickly say your name so that at least there's, introduction and everyone has a sense of who's here. And then I can then be able to introduce our panelists for the night and we can be able to kick off our conversation. There's free-flowing snacks and tea, so feel free to do that at your pleasure. So I think I will start on my far left. On my far left, just quickly tell us your name, where you're coming from if you're interested, and then we can take it around the room.
My name is Cecilia. Creative writer.
We'll move this way.
Hello everyone, my name is Steve Dur. I work as a producer.
My name is Pamela. I work for Local. I do the
Good evening, I'm Lucia again, and I work for
My name is I work for
interest because it's shown how the diversity in the room, right? So I think that will also give us perspective as we're trying to have this discussion and the conversation. It's not just going to be, the panels who are kind of giving you or feeding information. I think we'll allow it to be more engaging. Everyone can be able to chip in and you give your opinions and your remarks and even your experience in the different fields that we are in. So my name is Rispa Onyango. I'm a digital policy lead here at the Lawyers Hub, and I'm going to be our moderator for the night. Our title today, or rather the point of discussion today, is misinformation, and specifically within the general elections that we had that we've just recently had. For some, it's over. For others, it's not over. So we have those two elements playing out. But what we really want to focus on was the kind of information that was going out and that was being displayed within our social media platforms. And this is specifically because of the different kind of angle IEBC chose to take with these particular elections. Yeah, how they chose to conduct it is not as we have seen before, and that came with its benefits but also its mishaps. So that's going to be the center and the focus of our conversation tonight. And for my panelists, I'm just going to invite them to join me up here. We have Catherine Muya from Article 19. It feels like a ceremonial where we're like, welcome. So we have Catherine Muya joining us from Article 19. We have Kofi Yeboah, who's coming in from Mozilla Foundation. We have Wamathai, who's coming in from BEC. And we have Cynthia, who's coming in from Fumbua. So kindly just help me welcome them onto the platform. Sorry. So I'll allow Ken to mic them, and then I'll be sharing this with one of you. So that's okay. Yeah. So as they're being mic'd, I think like I've earlier mentioned, we've just conducted our, or the two of us. Okay. We've just conducted our elections, and for many, and from like the different kind of comments that we have received on these particular elections, they have been hailed as being quite transparent. Yeah, IBC allowing engagement and interaction, especially with their platform, where they were able to put in and key in the raw data sets as relates to the different ballot papers, and so you're able to just go onto the platform, download the forms, tabulate, and so on and so forth. So to that extent, many hailed that as being very transparent and being very open and very engaging even with the general public. But then something that now happened as a result of that was the inverse, which is the issue of misinformation and just the sharing of different results and tallies and content on social media platforms. So that was what I think that is what I'd like us to kind of focus on and look at. And the first question I think I will ask to the guys on the panel, and primarily because of the kind of work that they're doing, is what was your observation as a result of the kind of angle that IEBC took? Yeah, that ability or that view where they were able to put out results and put out tallies out there, and then everyone is able to interact, engage with that. What was the observation when it now comes to social media platforms as a result of that decision or the objective as IEBC? And maybe as you answer the question, you can be able to tell us a bit more about your work so that we now tie it into the question. So I'll start at my far right with Kate.
Hi everyone. I really hope you can hear me. I really hope you can hear me. So my name is Catherine, as I said, and I work at Article 19 in South Africa, which is an NGO that promotes free expression and access to information. So for us, one of the things that we were happy about is I think maybe there's a general agreement that in terms of IEBC publishing the results and the Form 34A was a level of transparency that allowed people to have access to information and then to do that information to provide some sort of transparency. But going back to the topic at hand, which is misinformation and disinformation, I wouldn't say that the misinformation particularly started at the point of the election. If you were really keen, you would have noticed that it mostly began before the election, during the campaign period. and then trickle down over to the electoral period. So what you had is, I don't think anyone was prepared for that level of transparency. And so as we were waiting, and as IBC was taking the time that by law they are given, of course we were getting, people were becoming creative, right? And it started, as your voice is probably gonna tell you, it started on the day of election day as well, with information that was more or less geared towards voter suppression, ensuring that maybe people in certain areas don't come out to vote. But if you look at the trends that we observed before the election, they're mostly replicated even up to now. So, for example, it was creating fake news adverts, misleading adverts. That was probably very common. If you would remember, also there were lots of polls that were being released before the election. So, what was happening in terms of misinformation is somebody would also create a fake poll, and then that poll would sort of like circulate depending on what candidate you had. Another was of course creating a fake news site, and this is like really creating one, really trying to be ingenuitive and creative about how this site looks, and it looks like an original news site. And so obviously there's a replication of like the Nation and Standard and everything else, but then there's also the actual creation of something that looks like a news website that's not actually a website. So those are some of the things that I think off the top of my head we had noticed before the election. After the election, right now, you can see recently, I think there was this fake news about the CEO of IBC, and then also revolting against, or rather, like coming out against the chairperson, Chebukati. So the thing, and there were even now, what happened is on Twitter, there was a fake account that had been created. And if you go on Twitter and check, that account was mostly created at the beginning of August. So and then now you have this, so you have that account tweeting information that looks like a legitimate IBC, like legitimate person, an impersonation account, but it's actually not true. During the same time around elections as well, you had SK Mashaya coming out to say, I don't actually have a Twitter page, or I don't actually have a Twitter account, right? But that SK Mashaya Twitter account, honestly, I also believed it was him because because it was constant every day, and it was things about it, and it's really hard. Even I think at some point Twitter, there was a parody account or impersonation account about him, and it was all you get. So it's sometimes, especially when not everyone has access to verification at some point, it might become difficult to distinguish if the account is actually true or not. Especially when people are probably not concerned to, really check into the finer details of that thing.
Use the mic that doesn't. Hi, everyone. My name is Kofi. Full disclosure, I'm Ghanaian. So I'm not Kenyan, but I follow Kenya's elections very closely, and not only the elections, but generally because I consider Kenya my second home, not because I'm here. But I work with Mozilla Foundation, and part of our work is around election disinformation, particularly investigating what platforms like social media do in terms of minimizing or mitigating misinformation and disinformation risk. To your question, which was quite interesting, because when a colleague of mine called Odanga, who did, and Brian Obilo, who did great research around the BBI, the Building the Bridges initiative period, there was a lot of disinformation during that period. For those of you who followed how that happened. And then also they did a research that focused on how social media influencers, verified social media influencers were paid to disseminate this kind of misinformation and disinformation. That gave me an idea that the election would be really tough in terms of mitigating disinformation. Because for those of you who followed the spread of who was winning between Odinga and then Ruto, the information that was spreading, especially when IBC shared whatever the form TED4A and TED4B and TED4C, so linking up so many letters. The interesting thing for me, I thought that was really going to minimize the spread of misinformation and this, but actually it didn't. We had verified accounts just I don't want to mention some names because some of them are my friends, you know, they were sharing and posting figures indicating that their candidate has won. And that was really critical at that moment. I thought that, you know, once the portal was open to everyone, at least we would have very clear winner, like everybody will be singing one song, but no, it didn't, it didn't happen that way, which was quite interesting for me at the time. So anyway, so that was my observation. And then the polls was just another thing for me to as well. I've never, in Ghana, we do polls, all right, but the Kenyan election had variety of polls. And I think that was an interesting one.
Thank you. Hi, once more. My name is Cynthia. I work with the Fumbua campaign as a social media manager. So my fellow panelists have given incredible examples of how misinformation manifested itself during this period. The analogy I'd like to use is a weather forecast. So before a major weather event happens, we are normally, you know, made aware like way before. The meteorologists normally tell you, you know, there's going to be a hurricane, there's going to be a tsunami or something. So you have contingency plans. So what happened was we knew that there were going to be instances of misinformation. So organizations like Fumbua came together, you know, to try and collectively equip Kenyans with, you know, tools to spot fake news and how to stop the spread of this fake news. But we know how cancerous misinformation is. So it came in waves of, you know, way before the elections. So we saw this happen even during the IBC clearing process, where the candidates had to go through this, you know, processes before they are confirmed that they can run or vie for these seats. And then that's where we saw people like, we saw several candidates who, you know, they knew way before that they had to present certain documents, but they did not come up with these documents. So they had to, you know, manipulate or tell this story differently so that Kenyans who don't have access to, you know, verification tools, they'll just go ahead and believe these people. And then we went ahead and saw this also during the campaign, where they manipulated stories and just to sort of confirm biases within social media users and Kenyans in general. And then the elections came, and then that was when the tsunami just hit, and the social media platforms went crazy. We saw what happened on Twitter. You know, we cannot say they were very well equipped, and even if they were equipped, the escalation and response rates were, you know, close to minuscule. So we can't really, you know, tell the difference between before elections and after elections. So that was my observation, and I think we still have a lot to learn.
No, I feel like my fellow panelists have sort of like said everything, but I want, rather, you know, like most of what I wanted to say, but I want to take another tangent in that I actually disagree that IBC was transparent because what they gave us, in my opinion, was actually forced. For those that know, there was a case, there was a minor K went to court, I think in 2016, rather, there was a judgment in a minor K case, I think 2016, 2017, that made them, rather that mandated IBC to, you know, share the, you know, that Form 34As, right? But I feel like what they did was, yes, that was what was required of them, but what they did was do bare minimum. Bare minimum means, so they share 40,000 plus forms on a platform, right? What do they think was going to happen? I mean, 40,000 forms, it's a scan. It's basically a picture in PDF format, right? What's going to happen? I mean, a lot of people, okay, obviously, being able to collate that data would take like a lot of resources, and for those people that couldn't, they use that sort of like manufacture manufacture data and actually spread disinformation because we are saying this is a person that's leading, etc., etc. I feel like going forward, we need to have way more conversations about the use of tech and also the transmission of not only the physical data, but maybe also alphanumeric data, because it's easy to pick that. It's easier to pick that and sort of like collate it and have a sort of like better picture, so that, let's say I'm media house A or media house B, or I'm organization A and I'm working in this area, I'm able to see sort of like cases of disinformation or misinformation and say, this is, this is wrong. Also, from a communication perspective, I feel like IBC was very poor. They sometimes waited up until 2 days to be able to, rather to respond to I feel like very critical things, and this started even before, during the campaign period as well. There was a lot of misinformation being peddled, not only at the presidential level, but also at the lower levels as well. They're very slow in sort of like communicating, and I feel like they could have done a better job as far as that's concerned, to be able to sort of like arrest some of this some of these cases of misinformation. Also, I feel like platforms kind of let us down. They are all here, the Twitters, the TikTok and Facebook just before the election. And I thought they were saying that put resources as far as, to be able to curb cases of misinformation and sort of highlight trusted sources of information. But unfortunately, what happened is that sources with dubious, or rather accounts, and we all know them, accounts with dubious sources of information were being boosted. And sometimes those like Kofi mentioned, sometimes those sources are people that we normally look up to and trust, but now they've chosen sides and now they're spreading misinformation. And what happened was that that misinformation was being boosted, and information from trusted sources, let's say from like media organizations, was mid-level at best. So that meant that we saw like a lot of screenshots that are being shared, on WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook with little or no context, or videos with no context being shared on platforms such as TikTok, and to be honest, I felt like based on what they'd said, they'd actually do better as far as, in my opinion, the reverse, boosting actually sources that we know and trust, and not just, people who are just influential. Yeah.
Before we get into the social media platforms, you've all raised the issue of the dissent on as regards to the transparency of IEBC, which I think preempted my question. I think I'd like to hear from you. Do you think he has already given us his opinion as far as IEBC and transparency are concerned, but then also as relates to election observers during this particular season? And you've mentioned that, there are certain efforts that are being fronted to make sure the spread of, fake news or misinformation is being curbed. But then do you think in the wake of the events and how things unfolded, were we really prepared as election observers, or even as relates to the organization and the work that you were doing? Would you really say that you put your best foot forward in trying to make sure we curb misinformation, disinformation? And I'm also going to be engaging the guys who are with us in the room, especially maybe people in the social media space, from communications. Tell us your thoughts on the same. Yeah. So I think I'll start here, and then we'll go around the room.
Thank you. So, like I said, misinformation, especially in Kenya, is part of a larger symptom. No matter how many efforts or how much effort or how many people, come together to sort of curb this, it doesn't sometimes, matter, because we find that even these same political leaders are deploying their own keyboard warriors, and then now it happens that the same keyboard warriors may happen to be influential as well. So it's been a trend in Kenya to heavily rely on user generated content as opposed to mainstream media. So once Kenyans see an influential person promoting or supporting this kind of information, the common Mwananchi will not go out of their way to fact check. So we did try. We are still trying. We have a long way to go in terms of curbing misinformation, but the tools are out there. The tools to spot fake news, the tools to verify and fact check. This is public information that is accessible to anyone with a smartphone. So yeah, we did try. We did put our best foot forward, but we still have a long way to go in terms of fighting misinformation, especially on social media.
I think in the case of Mozilla, what we did was, and our work mainly is holding, well, not mainly, but part of it is holding platforms accountable. And so what we did was we did a very investigative research on TikTok platform, and I'm sure some of you heard that, and it was done by Odanga. And what we tried to do was that we realized during actually prior to the elections, there were a lot of misinformation being spread across TikTok a lot because it's a video based platform, and so it was easier that way to reach people. And what we realized was that some of the videos were breached even TikTok's own community guidelines in terms of hate speech, in terms of false news, profanity, and all that, with regards to one particular political party as against the other. And what we did was to point to TikTok that, your guidelines and social media platform algorithm patterns are rather sort of incentivizing such hate speech content to be amplified more than content that are truthful. And so you need to do something about it before the elections happen. And so what Odanga's work did was to expose that weakness in TikTok's platform. And we brought that to TikTok. And obviously, what happens normally is they will issue, a very, I just want to be extremely polite with them. They would issue, a very normal statement saying that, they will resolve it and all that. But for those of you who still followed, you realize that it still wasn't. But I think for us, what was interesting was that organizations, and especially civil society organizations, became aware of this. The fact that TikTok in particular was a very not deadly, deadly is to an extreme word to use, was not a very convenient platform for protecting election integrity, in Kenya. Oh.
Okay, I'm going to say this. For me, and I think maybe just to pick it up where Brad Coffee left in terms of platform accountability. So what we did as Article 19, I think we met both Meta and TikTok before the elections, and with other partners as well. And what we tried to do is to try and give them, with our knowledge of the Kenyan context, our knowledge of Kenyan history, what are some of the things that maybe they should look out for during the elections. And of course, maybe tallying and I think tallying and verification of results was something that we consistently raised. To the extent that that was taken into consideration by the company is still something that, as we can see, was probably not done very well. But also, one of the things that maybe if we ask accountability from platforms, they always keep saying is, we've put together teams. So what I've never understood personally, and I still want to ask the platforms, is within themselves in the platforms, they have a policy around misinformation, they have a policy, they have all these nice policies, and they have people within that company that enforce those policies on a day-to-day. Now, what we were asking is, okay, so you're saying that you've put together teams, right? You've put together what they call a war room. which to my understanding is basically if this person was working on issues to do with trust and safety on the platform, another one was working on misinformation, another one was working on, like, let's say, what are the others? Content something. They're all put together for efficiency. That's what I understand is our war room, right? And most of the people we meet are from foreign offices. So we meet probably, let's say, people from Dublin or different places of the world, and they tell us they work all together. But now the question is, if these teams never at any point had local people, local context to begin with, putting them together in the room and saying that you've created this sort of efficiency is not really solving the problem. Do you get what I'm trying to say? It's like you put a bunch of people who did not know how to deal with the problem from the beginning into a room so that they can together not know how to do it together, right, collectively. So what we need to do, and even when I think some of the issues that have come out within the so-called, over the last period towards the election, is when they come and say they want to hire, okay, let's say they want to hire our social media strategist here, or Silas at the back because he's really great with tech and is Kenyan, to sort of see what's on the platform and put what they call like labeling. So for example, during the elections, it would have been this results have not been identified by IBC or things like that. They don't pay them well, right? And they give them a lot of work. So they have to meet very stringent conditions. So it's like you are constantly on your screen, you have to work for a very long time, and the lawyers in the room, labor laws, right? So they violate the labor laws because you have to work for a really long time. In situations where you need breaks, in situations where some of the things that you're watching are really bad, you don't actually get the support that you need. So in terms of that, then you find the moderation is, we need like more, we need to demand more. And that means that they need to actually want to do more. I'm not denying that they were here. They did a lot of work in terms of engaging with stakeholders, but the engagement with stakeholders needs to move beyond coming to tell us that you have policies, but then moving to also provide a sort of transparency in how these policies that you have, that we don't deny you have, are being enforced within the understanding of what we have as Kenyans and understanding of our own language. So maybe just to finish, so for example, we were helping, or we helped them with a list of words that within us we know is like bad words, right? So like what we find is usually mostly offensive towards us or within our own communities, which is something like a lexicon list, right? So that they can help the algorithms and train the algorithms to sort of identify those things. But the only challenge with that is those words change because we are Kenyans. So for example, today the trending word is opaque. So opaque was not a trending word when they came in March, right? But it's a trending word now. So it constantly needs people who constantly are alive to your context to constantly know in sort of simplify that. Yeah.
And so I'll allow us in the room to also engage in this conversation and chip in. So what was your observation or during this period as relates to misinformation and, the happenings? Yeah.
I guess sort of this election would the first election I participated in as a Kenyan is 2007, and what I've noticed is that progressively the elections have been getting more of that situation where if you are someone who consumes certain media, like if you read maybe the Standard as opposed to the Nation, you could be receiving information such that you completely live in a completely different world politically than someone who reads the opposite. And it's been progressively getting worse and worse. And with technology, of course, with TikTok and things like those. So I'm just wondering, what will the situation be when we arrive at really good deepfakes, where someone could tell you, this is what the politician says, there's video of it? Because we kind of saw something like that, those editing of videos where they cut off when someone says something. But now there'll be very good deepfakes, even to the point where someone will say, oh, so-and-so is dead, and then other people will say, no, they're not, here's a video of them talking recently, and so I'm just wondering what the situation will be in that.
Forget. I think that a lot has been left to civil society and platforms to do this civic education, and we've forgotten that IBC gets a lot of money every year, or rather gets a lot of money to do civic education. Okay, sometimes it's politicized, so they don't get the budgets they actually want. But I feel like this is a point or an area for people who work in this space to push for, to have IEBC invest a lot of money, both offline and online, in civic education. Because if we don't do that, if we don't have everyone pulling their weight, it's going to get worse. And for me, I feel like 2022, my opinion, we just scraped the surface. I thought it was going to get worse. So you can imagine a situation now where the 8 million we're being told that didn't registers to vote, so the stakes are higher. So you can imagine how it's going to be in like 2027. So the civic education is something that we really should push for.
I am glad that he brought up the media houses, because it is very important that they do not be left out of this discussion, because we have seen media personalities or newspapers trying to sensationalize stories, creating like very crazy headlines, or when they post their links on social media, we have very images that are just there for clickbait. But as Kenyans, it is also our civic duty to take it a step further and just try to sort of verify if this is what the Standard said. What is the Daily Nation saying? What is the Star, the People's Daily? What are they saying? And if it is a link on social media, if it is an image on social media, how can I verify it? Do you do peer reviews? Do you talk to other people who have seen this and verified this information? Do you run them through softwares? If it's a deepfake, there are softwares that you can run them through to sort of verify if it's a fake video, if it has been manipulated. So it is important that media and media related organizations should not be left out of this conversation as well.
I think, again, my question has been preempted as relates to media houses and their role in all of this. One of the running jokes was, I think, especially on Tuesday, the 9th, getting into Wednesday and all, it was more of, if you want to see where you're winning, go to a particular, so that usikufe moyo, do not lose heart. If you want to see where your person is winning, go to this station. If you want to feel like, these ones are losing, go to this other station. And so I think my question to our panelists and even to the guys in the room, do we think the media houses, especially because as much as social media is great, like it's crazy in our context, but mainstream media is still very, a lot of Kenyans still rely on mainstream media, radio, that kind of information. That's where we get our content. So could they have done a better job during this period? And did they really do a good job as far as just gatekeeping within their industry is concerned? So okay, no, not gatekeeping. Watchdogging, would watchdog be a better word, yeah? Being like a safeguard, making sure, ensuring that they're curbing, the kind of information that's going out there, verifying, making sure, it's not causing as much anxiety as this whole, specifically for the media houses. I think it was causing or generating a lot of, different talks, tension, anxiety, because at some point they stopped, right? At some point they stopped tallying, and it was just at a standstill, and we are now all just waiting for IEBC. And I think this also came in after, was it Media Council of Kenya? There's some concerns that they raised about, the discrepancies are across the different houses. And so after that, I think they just stopped tallying. Either they began all over again, but they did not give us any results. That's what I know. So my question is, could they have done a better job in trying to make sure, in trying to safeguard the Kenyans, the users, and making sure that the verification of either votes, results, etc. Yeah. So we'll start with her because she's burning, and then I'll come back to my panelists.
I think for the media houses, especially like the various TV stations that we had, like NTV, KTN, Citizen, and the rest, when it comes to misinformation, it's not only during the tallying period. If you look at even before, we went and voted on, it was the 9th of August. Yeah, if you look at how they phrase their headlines, yeah, when they were reporting on certain campaigns or a certain candidate and everything, you can tell what they are talking about and what the headline is saying on the television is not the same. And most people just read the headlines, especially your parents, they just read the headlines and then leave it. Hata sikia nini wanasema, you get. So when you have that, and then you look at how they display the information from the tallying centers, some of them are saying their machines are faster, they're tallying faster than the rest. That's why our numbers are different from the others. If you look at how they are relaying information and also how they display the information about the results, it kind of merges with the storyline that they had painted before the election. So it's like I'm trying to narrate a story towards a certain candidate all the way through, yeah? So they have done a better job, obviously they would, but there is this thing that they usually do, especially during the election period, where they sensationalize certain topics and they run with it because they know that that's what will give them like the views that they want or will pull in more viewers for them. So yeah, they would have done better and they would have basically ensured that they are more responsible and there is ethics in journalism. And I think they threw that out the window for the most of the electioneering period. And what else? Okay, for one of the bodies, I remember you were talking about civil societies taking more a bulk of the work when it comes to, let's say, how to come. Yes. The first thing that came into my mind was Communications Authority, yeah? They usually come around when, let's say, there's outrage amongst Kenyans. A certain journalist has said this, why aren't you acting, why aren't you doing this? Then they launch investigations and a slap on the wrist for the journalist and such, but they don't have the initiative. Yes. Yeah, there's also that. So mostly they don't come into play when they are needed to. They only go there when they are pushed by Kenyans, by the same. So even the initiative to go after some of the atrocities that I'll call them atrocities committed by the media houses wasn't seen during the period. That's my take though.
So it seems to me as though there are yes. So I'm Chege, a practicing advocate and a lecturer. Now, it seems to me that there are, to me personally, just as a citizen, that there were okay. So we are discussing verification of information and distinguishing between information and misinformation. This exercise had two parts. There was the part before the Chebukati thing in Bomas, where everyone was saying, let's wait for Chebukati.
Yeah.
So, in other words, despite all the shenanigans on Twitter, there was still a high level of credibility in our institutions. And then there was after, where now you have high level institutional infighting. And to me, this is the part that concerns me. Yeah. At this level, how does one come to a conclusion? For example, when you are being told that a third party was handling Form 34s, you know, how does a citizen, how do I arrive at any sort of sense? You know, because part of the reason I came here was because I felt like I was going insane. I've been reading some affidavits by the relevant partners and I have no idea what is true and what is false. You know, so thanks.
I think, so I have 2 points. One on the platforms as Kat was talking about, but there's also, so back to media houses, I feel like the question on accountability starts from like way back. How much of the information that media houses put out there is from research, and how much of it are they picking up on platforms? I think we've complained a lot about platforms, media houses taking stories, taking threads that people have created on Twitter and turned it into content behind their paywall, their paywalls, right? So I think when it comes to, like, could they have done better? Yes, because I think also a lot of the things that they were reporting on, there are very few people we could rely on, very few media houses. And this is mostly because, in part, they're not doing enough work by themselves as they should. They're not holding themselves up to the standard that they promised to comply to. So I think this question goes back to this, it dates further back before the elections. How much of the information that media houses are putting out there, again, because it's sensationalized, is from the internet? And so this also goes hand in hand with the conversation around holding governments accountable. We see the DCI putting out threads every day of like gruesome things in the funniest ways, putting memes, because people are mimifying everything in the internet. You could be dying and someone would be like, oh my God, that's a funny shot, you know? So this goes back to also like regulations. If we were in the EU, now I've just like looped over into platforms. If we were in the EU and there was a conversation about the elections somewhere, let's take Finland, no, not Finland, Denmark. And there was the whole people putting out, you know, like important figures in the elections, putting out information about the elections. They could have been held to a standard. They could have been held accountable for what they were saying, beyond just tagging that tweet as this might be misinformation. Let's think about the fact, like even in the US, they deplatformed someone who was spreading a lot of misinformation. We still have that going on here, mostly because, and these platforms feel like they can get away because our governments refuse to hold them accountable. So there's two parts here. Yes, one, having platforms put more resources into the local context. But there's one thing that we risk with giving them a lexicon of words: content moderation issues. We know, you know, now we'd have to go and translate when someone's account has been taken down when they are saying something contrary to what we think they would be saying. So them putting more resources into that, but also our governments holding these platforms more accountable. A lot should have been done. A lot of them should have been called out. A lot of international media houses should have been called out. They should have been held accountable for what they reported. They should not have been allowed to do any more work here until they uphold themselves to a certain standard, but they haven't, and they have not been held accountable. So, yeah.
I don't know whether I should stand. Thank you very much once more. I'm having a very different analogy on your question, Madam Panelist. May we understand to what extent do media houses owe a duty of care? And which kind of duty of care do they owe the citizen? And therefore, which kind of citizen? Which kind of citizens? Now, when there were results streaming, I realized there were three kinds of citizens which required information. One, they were informed citizens, right? They were almost being informed, but less informed citizens. And there were citizens who were totally not informed. Now you realize majority of less informed and totally not informed were relying on the media houses. And therefore, the informed already knew what was going on, in quotes. Now, to your answer, media houses tried. I cannot say they did not. They tried too much they could, because this is the first election, actually, I'm seeing the media houses streaming provisional results as they are. That is what was being streamed. Now, I do not understand why there are really no much reforms that have been put in place. Media houses, we could not blame a media house which is working from a point of no, I think of no basis. So if we were to blame media houses, then we would have placed formidable reforms, right, that would enable media houses to have a proper duty of care that can be verifiable, right? Now, such kind of sinusoidal kind of performance where we have informed citizens, we have less informed and totally not informed, enabled media houses actually to stand a chance of being, of performing proper, to my understanding. The discussions media houses were having with various personnel in the country were even enough to enable a citizen who was not informed to know what was really going on. There was an activity going on at Bomas. Citizens were there with their personnel. I mean, some very kind of persons in the country which were helping the citizens who were less informed to get analysis of what was going on. There was a point where Gladys Sholei was allegedly caught by a laptop, right? Then just immediately, Gladys Sholei was called upon by NTV and some lawyers from both sides of candidatures. Now, from the analysis that they were giving, now it was just enough to enable a citizen who is totally not informed, a citizen who is less informed, to get really know what was going on, right? So to my understanding, I mean, media houses tried as much as they could, because they even tried to bring people who have understanding of what is going on, people who have understanding of knowledge of what is election, what is data streaming, what is results streaming, what is Form 34A, what is Form 34B, and what is Form 34C and D. Because really, if the media houses could have not brought these personnel into board, no, I think less informed people will have not know what is even Form 34D. Because today, if you go if you go to somewhere in Turkana, a very remote place, we'll explain to you that Form 34As are those ones from the polling station that make Form 34B to the Form 34D. So to my understanding, media houses tried, but moving forward, I think there should be some reforms that should be made in place, a formidable reform, right? That will enable a media house to stand a chance of duty of care. Thank you very much.
I agree and I disagree. As far as your point is concerned, I feel like media houses were not prepared. They did not know. If you ask me, they did not understand what was required. Especially as far as tabulation is concerned. What happened before that, I feel like before the election, the campaign period, etc., we had a lot of bias. And we all know one media house is leaning toward this side. And obviously that's how do I put it? They're sort of coloring, within the lines. They're not outside the lines. I mean, they're within their license, to be able to do that. But I feel like in the absence of large scale media literacy, it's dangerous. They're not breaking the law, but I feel like it's something that we should highlight, and it should be a societal thing, so that we get two things. First of all, if you're on this side, at least declare. It happens in other countries. And then also on the citizen side, there needs to be a lot of media literacy. We could avoid so many things if there was continuous, if you ask me, at all levels. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about procurement, we're talking about devolution, or elections. If there was a lot more media literacy in the country, I feel like we can be able to avoid a lot of things. Now, as far as their mistakes during the election, they had before the election, the media, through the Media Council, the Editors Guild, etc., they had a lot of meetings with IBC, and IBC was telling them, oh, by the way, we will have the forms, but also we will have electronic results. And the IBC was being very dodgy as far as that's concerned, especially when they're being asked by us and groups like Internet etc. as the specifics of the electronic, or rather the let's call it alphanumeric, rather than just the forms, right? So they just said, they just did a diagram. Meeting, they did a diagram and said the results are going to be presented on a screen, etc. But I felt that for the media, they could have pushed, in my opinion, they could have pushed for specifics, and also for them to actually have access, direct access, not not at a screen at Bomas, but direct access to that data, so that maybe that could have helped them to be able to sort of like get the alphanumeric data faster. Also, I felt that focusing on 34A was a mistake, because 34As were 40,000 and something. Why not just wait until 34Bs? I didn't understand, because 34Bs, the form 34B was a constituency tally, right? It was easier. That's what Reuters and I think BBC used. So I think there was some sort of lack of imagination, and they didn't foresee the work at hand. They thought 20 people or 40 people are going to be able to access PDF data in 3 days. I don't get it. Yeah.
I actually don't know what to say, but because you've said a lot. I think one thing that was clear was that, and probably not everyone would agree, or everyone would agree, is that the election was being done on a low trust country in general, just like in Ghana, right? In terms of respect to the media. Media in Kenya historically has been known to be moved to one side of political affiliation, in quote. And so generally people don't trust media, generally. And so that's why organizations like the Bloggers Association, just also grew up organically in that way. What I'm trying to say is that generally people confirmed their information online before media, mainstream media, generally. And so in that case, and this is where I raise my case, that is why we need to sort of hold platforms accountable much more than the media organizations. Some might disagree with me, which is fine. But it is something that, and again, it goes to what Hilda was saying, it's something that in Africa we don't do much. If you look at what happened with the Cambridge Analytica in the US, where Trump ended up winning, similar thing happened in Kenya during that time in 2017, and nothing happened here. Those that followed the conversation, Facebook was never held accountable, Cambridge Analytica was never held accountable, and everything was okay. But the information, and it wasn't the fault of the media in that case, right? So, and always, platforms like Facebook, Twitter hide behind this internet shutdowns, digital rights excuse, and then go scot-free without doing anything. And then, civil society organizations also, which I love them so much, therefore they fall prey to some of these things, and then also do campaign in that regard, right? Because of digital right. But then when are we going to, be very intentional about holding platforms accountable and say that, what, the platforms that you have designed incentivizes the amplification of hate speech. That if, for those who understand how these platforms are developed, it's just like a regular conversation with people. Rumor, hate speech spread faster, like news that is not true spread faster among us than ones that are true. And that is how the platforms are modeled, right? And so for you to address issues about misinformation and disinformation, it's not about developing a new community guidelines. It's not about just flagging. It's not about, it's about changing that design of how do you disincentivize, right? That design, so that when the algorithm is just a matter of, if you see this, it should go to this. If you don't see this, it shouldn't be this. That's basically what our algorithm is all about. So if you're designing a platform and it says, if you see information that is sensational, you shouldn't amplify it. That's how it's supposed to be redesigned. But anyway, I would end it here.
I'm good.
Okay.
So for me, I think coffee you have, but for the media mostly, because at Article 19 we have a media unit that also works with journalists. So I want to raise some of the things that, because for me entirely, I don't think they were entirely at fault. I agree that they should not post clickbait, right? Like nobody should post clickbait. But to the extent that when I read an article that had been published by one of the, I think it was editors or someone from, I don't remember which media house, but I have the link to the article I can share. What they said is, because they had constantly always asked for the Form 34As and never got it, they were not actually prepared for the tallying, right? So what they were prepared for was something that had to do with on the ground and coming, but it was not necessarily tallying, right? So they didn't actually have sufficient resources for the tallying. Then when they started tallying, each media house was coordinating its own tallying, right? So they were using the Form 34As, as you said, and the Form 34As were not in like a CSV file. So it's not easy for you to take the data and like do anything with it. It's a PDF, right? And even when I remember there were jokes going around for techies who were like trying to come up with like a CVS file and things like that, trying to see how that data can be extracted to make the tallying really easy. But it wasn't, right? So it meant you have to go form by form, really just trying to tally. Then in the midst of them doing that, because you see IEBC didn't start giving the Form 34B figures until maybe a day or a day two after the election, right? In my opinion, I didn't see them like coming out to say, so we've received this and now start giving the tally. So the media houses had already, in fact, actually started to tally. Then IEBC came and started giving figures of Form 34B, which is why at some point, I think it was Reuters that now rerouted the figure to start tallying with what IEBC was giving as a tally for Form 34B. I think that in terms of providing coverage, they really were prepared to provide coverage, because some of the things that, like for example, when Galishole was like, with the whole thing, the media clips, Kenyans were actually really awake, and you could see somebody really went back to when there was that briefing, grabbed the 5 minutes of the most relevant content and turn it into a TikTok. That's how efficient Kenyans were in terms of actually trying to decipher what was going on, right? They were really going into the nitty-gritty of it and using footage that had been provided, and especially now because you can stream it on Facebook. So I think to the extent that we need to hold them accountable, yes, we do, but to the extent that we also need to understand, because one of the things that they actually raised as a media house in the spirit of objectivity is that they have reporters on the ground, right? I would say this because when I work with my colleagues who also work in protection, which is protection of journalists, it's, for example, because we all have profiled one media house to be supporting one party, those same media houses still have to go to the areas. Like, for example, if you profile this person this media house is an Azimio supporter, the same media houses and journalists from this organization still have to report relevant content from the opposing party, which means those field people still have to travel to that area, right? So when it comes to, let's say here, if we actually had the mic, not the lapel mic, the mic, and it has a citizen thing on it. At some point, if you notice, for the safety of journalists, they remove the media tag so that the journalists are not able to, because you see, it's a point of risk for them. So again, what the media houses were also saying is the final tally would also expose their own journalists to risk. Not that it's an excuse, but it's also something that they were raising that I think that is also important to raise here. That also the consideration of the safety of the journalists is also something that they had in the event, and I think I thought about it too, in the event that the final tally is different from what IEBC announces. From a risk perspective, I sort of agreed with that determination. Nonetheless, yes, maybe they should have finished counting, but at the end of it all, I think they stopped because IEBC started doing the Form 37B thing. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question from our online audience, and I think I'll tie it to his. Okay.
I still feel like my concern has not been addressed. let's say that for all the shortcomings of social media, everything was relatively okay until the presidential tally was announced. There were shortcomings. There was hate speech, but there are also disincentives. In Kenya, you can literally go to jail for doing some stuff. And these are new developments. And DPP has been quite serious about some of these things. Disincentives exist. I'm not saying the situation was perfect, but I'm saying that the real crisis occurs when you have powerful people providing information against one another, not us. Yeah, the real crisis occurs when you have Chebukati, Raila, Ruto providing different sets of information.
Yeah.
And in this case, what can we do? That's the question I was asking. To me, this is the most serious thing.
Let me tie it to this online question, which talks about what makes fake news fake. If person A proclaims that what he thinks is a truth, and person B, or even a larger public disagrees, does that make person A a purveyor of fake news? So I think that could be another angle to his question that our panelists and you can address.
So I think I'll try and answer your question now. My thinking, could be wrong, is that misinformation is allowed in the society. And this is my take. For example, if you're Madai, and I call you, I tell him, that guy is called Thai. I have misinformed you. Right? I've passed on wrong information, false information. However, the point where this becomes a crisis is when I use the misinformation as a weapon. When my intention now becomes, I know this is wrong, but because I want to achieve certain objectives, I push that narrative in a certain direction. And I think that's why it becomes punishable. That's why it becomes an offense. And that's why you find that elements like social media have certain mechanisms of flagging information. If it becomes too much, they tell you, hey, Chief, hey, Andrew Tate, hey, toka hapa. Trump, go away. So when misinformation becomes disinformation, I think that is where the crisis is.
There's a difference between misinformation, which is you're spreading false news without knowing, and disinformation, where you're actually doing it on purpose. Now, to your question, in our case, or rather in how you put it, I feel like IBC as the arbiter needs to come out strongly and start communicating. I feel like they have a whole communication department, and it has many people, but they are very, very bad at communication. And when you think about it, because they are in charge of the election, they should be the A to Z of sort of like, this is what is happening, and we should be following that. And I'm sure if they were a bit more proactive, the media houses could pick that up as well. So if you ask me, obviously I'm not excusing any cases of disinformation, but if you ask me, if they were a bit more proactive, it would help. But I don't foresee a situation where politicians will ever behave. So this will always happen. But you can have a better situation where there's a lot of information, such that it is easier for people to make a determination whether this is true or not, rather than have an absence of information and then we don't know what's going on. Yeah.
So my answer will be very brief, which is it's not really an answer, but also an extension of your question. There is nothing like two truths. There is nothing that exists that I'm telling the truth. She's also telling the truth about the same statement, but like in a different way or in her own opinion. I do not think that that exists because, okay, in this context, the only person Kenyans should be relying on for information election related is the IEBC. But if the IEBC chairperson is telling us something and his vice chair is telling us something different, and the two top contenders for the presidential seat are also saying two very different things. So my question would be, I don't know if they're gonna watch this, but like, in whose hands are we safe as Kenyans? Because we are trying our best to fight misinformation. I cannot, fact check the IEBC because essentially what they're telling us is supposed to be true, right? But if we cannot rely on these people, in whose hands? Anyway, my thoughts would be, let's just, for the transparency issue and also in just for honesty purposes, let's wait maybe for the court ruling until we are sure about that, then we can know like the way forward.
Are we safe at the judiciary?
I think your question is really a very important one. Really like it, and it brings back to the statement that you made that how do we fact check IBC, right? It's really a key thing. But then what Wamatai also said about the fact that like when there's that information absence, there's no way you would be able to control what kind of information comes out because people would have to feed on any information, right? And so seriously, it's a very important question that I'm also thinking about. How do you fact check organizations that are supposed to rather give us the, supposedly the truth? Anyway, to the question about how do you determine fake news, I think it's a very and whether somebody decides that this is true to me and whatever. It's a very clear case of what happened during the COVID period, where people said, "Oh, COVID is not real." Others said COVID is real until you got infected, or somebody that really, really got sick to the point of very serious case. And I think that's where you need strong institutions who are not compromised, because during the COVID time, we had strong institutions that were supposed to provide us with the correct information, being a bit biased in the sense of being prey to conspiracy theories. And so in this case, I think it's best that such institutions would be very sort of firm with providing us with the information that we need, but then also know that you cannot determine truth by just thinking that you think is true, whatever you believe is true. But it follows a certain process to be able to determine, and that's exactly what the fact-checking organizations also do. They have a certain level of principles to follow and steps to follow to determine whether whatever you're saying is right or wrong. That's why we can say that you are just what you're saying is not true, or is true. Yeah. So I cannot sit here and determine my own truth.
Can't own your truth.
No.
I think your question is, if we ask ourselves the real truth, is who are the biggest purveyors of disinformation online? Who benefit the most from disinforming people about election results, right? It's the same people who are actually spreading the disinformation themselves, right? So that you can believe them, right? You see, in 2017, when Cambridge Analytica was happening in Kenya, they didn't just, it's a company for profit. They didn't come here by themselves on their own volition to spread disinformation and voter apathy, right? They were paid by someone to come and do the exact same thing. The influencers that are being paid, the trending algorithms that are being done, they have been, I think there was a time when over the past few months, which media house I forget, but published a list of influencers who may or may not be affiliated to certain companies, certain like factions of the electorate, or the ones who are, yes, the people we are voting for. I forget the name. And it was allegedly that they were paid, right? And they came out to dispute it, and they're like, I was named by this and I don't agree. I was named and I don't agree. So the issue about it is, even when we ask for government response, at times the people who end up in government are the people who first started by promoting this information online, right? And paying for it so that you can actually be disinformed to not believe it. That's just the truth, right? I mean, I'm not lying. So if we are actually doing this, then it means that we are out to search for the truth. We are out to then say, what is the truth? And that means sometimes we have to question leaders. And that's why we're seeing people who we respected then coming out for a different faction or coming out to spread more information on this and that. It's because they're the greatest people who benefit from disinforming people, because disinformation always has an aim. It's not just to release it out in the open for no apparent reason. It's so that you can create. So for example, the one that I was trying to tell Coffee is that sometimes we have lions roaming around. It's so that people from certain strongholds don't come out to vote, right? So there are people who benefit. And when I spoke to like people who are in charge of platforms, the one thing that they constantly say is, for example, if it's misinforming videos on TikTok, there would always be somebody who's creating disinformation. Trust you, because it benefits somebody to create it, right? And so what you need to do is to create strong structures, to create, and I would go back to what Coffee said, is to then look at how are we as a society trying to deal with this problem? How are we trying to enforce it? How are we trying to, so that you deal with the platform in itself? Because people who will always find creative ways, like for example, now you asked about deepfakes, right? So in the next election, maybe the misinformation will even be more difficult to identify. So it won't be an edited version of the video, but it will be somebody. And you already saw some of the deepfakes where you saw Obama congratulating somebody, or like a video trending and BBC has to come out and do something like that. People getting creative, and this is not like a deepfake, but imitating Time. There was a fake Time cover magazine on a, because so the methods will get more sophisticated. What we need to do is ask ourselves, and challenge to you, Coffee, is what are we doing to support, like civil society organizations that want to do disinformation investigation? How are we supporting them? How are we, and asking the right questions, like Mamatai was saying, how are we doing media literacy? Are we holding like entities that have government budget and have resources to actually do the literacy? And then also when it comes to government and government enforcement, really understanding and ensuring and advocating for government to always take a free expression like approach to how they do the enforcement, because that's also another thing. Yeah.
And I think I want us to wrap up, so I also allow you guys to network. You don't live here without knowing a few people, and I'm sure the questions in the room. Yeah, so to ask the last question, and Kate has brought it up in her last statement, what options are available to platforms in the fight against misinformation without interfering with the freedom of expression? So that's the last question I think I'd have my panelists addressed, and then we have one question from us. Is there anyone else? And 2. And 3. So we'll do the 3 questions after we've done that last round of questions. For the sake of Cynthia, what options are available for the platforms in the fight against misinformation, especially without interfering with the freedom of expression?
I think for platforms, they need to, and Kathy, I think she brought this out earlier, they actually need to invest a lot of resources as far as content moderation is concerned. It is not enough to hire, 500 people and then they are dealing with, the whole of English-speaking Africa. It doesn't even make any sense. And then they're paying them, sorry for my language, terrible, okay, I won't use it, terrible, whatever. They have sort of like terrible compensation for people who are practically working 11 hours a day. I mean, that doesn't actually make any sense. And then for me, I would I'd rather anyone who's working in Kenya be a Kenyan. Like that actually makes a lot of sense. You don't have to learn words. You live here, you know what's going on. It's very easy for you to be able to understand. But we can't just leave these two platforms. We have to actually do a lot of advocacy as far as our governments are concerned. I think Kofi or Kathy brought it up as far as some of the things that have happened, and our government hasn't actually done anything to address some of the things that happened. We all know Facebook. I mean, Cambridge Analytica. Now there's TikTok. Mozilla actually did research on that, and also Twitter. Basically, everyone has blood on their hands. But what is, as far as our government is concerned, what are they doing in terms of platform governance and to be able to sort of like hold these platforms to account for things that have happened on their platforms? They're lacking there, and we can advocate as civil society. We can advocate. Basically, every Kenyan, not just civil society, we can advocate for the government to actually take action when things like this happen, or rather, platforms let some of these things happen. And we've seen a lot of, for instance, we've seen a lot of disinformation on every single social media platform that you can think of. But our government hasn't said anything. Yeah.
The questions and then allow the three to address the three questions. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Leo. I come from the tech side of the world. It's not more of a question, but more of my experience, sharing my experience. And I think what I feel. So when I was thinking about this, what makes something the truth or the right information when you're doing fact checking? And it's quite difficult actually, because I have come to learn that you can create an alternative truth, and actually it gains momentum so fast. Within 24 hours, it's actually the gospel truth. And again, the definition is challenging in itself. When you look at a dictionary, something that is a fact is something that is true. Something that is true is something that is a fact. Something that is a fact is something that is accurate. Something that is accurate is something that you can prove it. Okay, so there's a whole cloud of it going around. But at least that last word, when you think about something that you can prove, scientifically is something that you can say you can fact check. But now our perceptions of truth, and this I faced personally, over election period, I was helping a few people across the country. And my mom calls me like at 3 p.m. The following day after election, tells me, please come home. They're about to announce the results. And you don't know how this world is going to come to turn. I'm like, there's no way. In this time and age, there's no way. Even the IBC has not started counting. What you're seeing in the media is nothing, neither here nor there. That's 3 p.m. By 6 p.m., she's very adamant. She's like, you need to come home now. Like, so I went home. Getting home, I realized what the issue was. She was seated there with my uncles and her sisters and brothers. And I had seen on one TV stations, there was a split screen. And one side was IBC, the other side was KICC, and they were 100% sure, I don't know how it gained momentum, that the results were being announced on that day. So I took a step back, and I remember, and someone has alluded to the COVID period, because I used to ignore a lot of this and tell her, what you're saying is to me, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, and we used to argue a lot. But I saw it that I think each of us has to take that extra step, especially on things that we are an authority. We tend to take up, we are in so many WhatsApp groups. If someone posts something, you know that this is just bullshit. Yeah, but by tomorrow, it's the truth. That is everywhere, and by that time, it has gained so much momentum, and fighting it is quite, it's harder. So I think we need to take that extra step, especially for things that we are an authority on, okay, and the influence we have, because people listen to what we say, okay. If I say something, if Omadai says something, probably people will believe Omadai more than me, but it's fine. But I think if we have that responsibility of speaking out and saying, hey, this one is not the truth. I've experimented with it over the past few months, and I've seen just guiding someone who, you know, it's quite tough to get someone to believe something else from what they believe. So telling them that, hey, okay, this is where it's coming from. Can you look at this and this? Can you test this? Can you read this? Do you believe this? And then eventually, they're like, okay, by the way, what you're saying is very logical. And they change their perception. Just like how my mom eventually figured out that, hey, we've not started counting. We've not started counting. Yeah. Thank you.
My question is actually an answer to that. And I will answer it from a legal perspective, and I'll narrow it down to data protection. Simple. There are two principles that I would just touch on it, just scratching it. One is the principle of data minimization, and the other one is data security. In that, as an entity, just collect what you need and you store it well so that it doesn't fall on other hands who are going to profile me, know certain biases I have, and then configure out something that confirms my biases. So if you're able to navigate that area, and I think the DPA Act of 2019 has certain provisions to that level, I think you're moving towards the right direction.
Thank you. My name is Tim Daguri. So for me, I'm all for holding, whether it's a political class, whether it's the media, whether it's us as citizenry, accountable. But then even as we grapple with disinformation, malinformation, misinformation, whatever you want to call it, I think we need to discuss how, even as we hold accountable, how do we stop ourselves, or how that progression from moderation into now censorship and other challenges. I think it's a conversation we definitely need to have, and I'd love to hear what the panel has to say. Yeah.
So lastly from our panel, as you address that question and give us your final remarks.
Maybe if I just take the moderation and censorship, and that's why I said, like, really just because first, if you look at the platform policies themselves, they are actually, there's a strong push to ensure that those policies from the onset comply with human rights standards, right? So, for example, on Facebook, it's actually not wrong to spread misinformation. They actually don't take it down unless it's misinformation unless it passes a certain threshold, but according to their policy and when they train you, they'll say they actually don't take it down. What they do is they sort of have this down ranking, things to actually deal with it, just to ensure that, because one of the arguments we had, and when we were presenting the information around tallying of results, is this person still has a right to express themselves. So the example that we had was perhaps it's a person who's disputing even what IBC has said, saying, I was the RO kwa ground, mini kwa na the right, 34B. You don't want to take it down because it's somebody else's form of expression, right? So you have to really intricately find the balance between having that thing online and then having it offline. And that's why you have to create like ways to ensure that in as much as you want content moderated, then you don't come to be like, you know, a censorship organization, right? So that's why even when, even for government entities, right? So like when NCIC was upset with Facebook about their lack of moderation, with content that was actually really hate speech, and the examples were really gruesome. And there were things, if I show you in this room, you would just see, okay, really, this couldn't have passed, right? But now, when it came to the response, the censorship in terms of not allowing you to have Facebook is not something that we want, right? So again, and this comes to my closing points, is there needs to be some sort of, sensitization even amongst regulators, so that they also don't take the censorship approach, right? So for platforms, we know we'll advocate for them, but even for regulators, which is really hard, then they also didn't take a censorship approach. So what we're doing, and as a close off, is just to also ensure that we sensitize regulators from the beginning around content moderation, so that then their responses also comply with human rights standards and free speech standards.
I'll just build on what Catherine was saying, especially about, and your point is your question is really important, because a similar thing happened in Nigeria during the NSAS. For those of you who followed the NSAS situation, where Twitter was shut down, supposedly shut down. I don't know how the government tried that they were going to complete that task, because obviously people were still tweeting. And it's important because, and again, it comes back to the fact that regulators don't even understand how the platform works in the first place to even regulate it, right? And for those of you who heard about the recent parliamentarian committee on internet, something in Africa, so there's this new committee for that parliamentarians are going to address issues about internet related in Africa. And the chairperson clearly said that they don't understand the issues, right? And it's not as if it's new. They've been regulating. So then the question is, what are the basis for those regulations over the past period of time? So again, it comes back to the fact that they need to have a better understanding of what these platforms, how they work. And then the last point is that these platforms also use AI enabled mechanisms, to be able to identify disinformation and misinformation on their platforms. But they need to do a solid retesting to be ensured that it actually be able to identify the nuanced conversations, because that's where the problem is, not just the binary of this is true, this is false. It's about the changing lingua, especially with Kenya, right? Now opaque is a word, so how does the AI pick that kind of conversation up, right? So, and again, it comes back to the fact that they need to invest a lot in the local talent. And that's one thing, that it's not just 5 people, 3 people working in Africa, part of the Africa policy team. And that's what you find when you go for the meetings. You find 3 policy team members, and then they are handling like the whole of 54 countries in Africa. How do you do that, right?
Thank you, Kofi.
So I will close by, first of all, appreciating Lawyers Hub for this platform, and then also just encouraging us to, take it upon ourselves to verify first before you share. There are some social media platforms that, even though they acted quite late, they set a couple of, for example, like Twitter. I don't know if it's still up on the Explore page where you can get verified sources of information. So there's still that part, but we still are yet to see, further developments on this. So we have 5 more years to go before we, 5 more years to improve on our verification, reforms with the media and the social media platforms as well. And also just to thank my panelists for their intriguing and their insightful contributions towards this conversation. Thank you.
Sorry, I have the mic. I'm okay. Well, I think I've said everything. And also, I feel like my panelists were amazing as well, as far as this particular topic is concerned. But my last thought, if you ask me, is that we need to sort of like do an audit from a general point of view. So it doesn't matter where you're from. I don't know, you're on the legal side, you're on the CSO side, social media, etc. Sort of like do an audit of what happened, what worked, what didn't work. And then we try, all those problems we've talked about, we try and advocate both sides, whether it's building coalitions like Fumbua, upskilling, let's say, for instance, content creators, lawyers, etc., or advocating on the platform side or advocating on the government side. Because I feel like if we just leave it to chance, like I feel the media did, I feel like what's going to happen is that we are going to have a space where we have sophisticated problems with a citizenry that is not that well informed, and the end result of that is that, I don't know, it's just dangerous, because it kind of looks like there'll be a lot of I don't know, in the Kenyan context, a lot of fear and and a lot of discord, and it's I don't even need to paint the picture more. So a lot of advocacy is needed at all levels, and I feel like a lot of training. I'm all for training everyone, but obviously the key ones are media in any way, not just mainstream. I feel like when people talk about the media, talk about online, we talk about offline. They're old people, they're boring. There's like a lot of young people who are creating news, and and they're an important, if you ask me, they're also an important resource to sort of like tap into. But also, they're also like social media influencers who can be taught how to fact check and verify. We do that work, but I feel like we could extend that to a lot more people, especially outside of Nairobi. I feel like Nairobi content creators and social media influencers are overtrained. But yeah, the work is a lot, and I don't know if at whatever vertical you're in, if you ever feel like the association can work with you, reach out. And thank you to Lawyers Hub for the invite.
You're welcome. And thank you for honoring the invite. I think our panelists have really been fantastic. The discourse has been enriching. And I think I want to release you guys to just have some time to, know who was in the room, have a conversation, follow up on, the things we've discussed. And then let's see how we can collaborate and do better. Yeah. So with that, I've been your moderator, Rispa Onyango, and I'm going to close it here.
Welcome to my YouTube channel, Coffee.